Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 89. We're in the week of Parsha Toldos, and as well as the week of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and has been the custom, let's begin with something timely. Also tonight is the Kinus HaShluchim banquet, where thousands of the Rebbe's Chabad Shluchim all over the world gathered together at the Rebbe's directive that he instituted in the United States in Tovshin Mem Daled. It'll be 1983, the end of 83. Earlier already in 81, he had instituted in Eretz Yisrael in Israel, the Kinus, then in 83 here in the United States. And then in 1987, suggested that it become the international Kinus, where Shluchim, emissaries, ambassadors from all over the world were gathered together. Now we all know that, and I've shared with many times at this episodes, that every one of us, every person, every Jew, every human being for that matter, is a shliach, is a messenger of God to this world to fulfill a purpose. We're not sent here by accident, God forbid. We didn't fall in here by any type of circumstance or coincidence, but rather very deliberately each of us appointed to achieve a particular mission. But as the Rebbe explains, there are people who actually dedicate and commit their lives 24/7 and to be identified as such, where many others do other things, and in that work that they do, they try to infuse it with some type of sense of purpose. But the goal, of course, is to understand that we are indeed 24/7 ambassadors of the divine calling for which we were sent to this earth. And despite everything that we get distracted by, we have to always remember what the focus is, what are the means, and what is the end, which is essentially what Chassidus is, and this is applied to Chassidus, Torah in general and Chassidus in particular, to keep us focused in a world that so easily can seduce and distract us in all different fashion and forms from what our core mission is. And that's the mission to transform this world, each of us, our corner of the world and material corner of the world, and turn it into a spiritual and divine home, which means to sublimate it, to refine it, and instead of it being a place of narcissism and selfishness, a place of giving, of illumination, of every form of virtue and kindness and compassion. And when we all do that, each in our own way, it combines together to create a massive form of energy, positive energy that has the power to create an eruption, like a volcano, but in this case a positive one, that erupts into a surge of goodness and kindness that ultimately transforms the world into a new state of consciousness, what we call the Messianic age. And as you read in Tanya, chapter 36 and 37, where he explains the purpose of existence, that's exactly the visualization, that each action that we do right now is like a building block. And when it all accumulates, all those building blocks, you have a new universe. And we'll talk about this later in the episode, addressing a question that was asked, or questions that were asked regarding this matter. But I'm just focusing it right now in the context of this week's chapter, where the first time we read about shlichus, the context and the idea of a mission. So even though in last week's Parsha we already read how Abraham sends on a mission Eliezer, his servant, to find a shidduch, a match for Rebecca, but here we have at the end of this week's chapter, Vayishlach Yitzchak, how Isaac and Rebecca send Jacob to go find a match for himself, to go to Charana, which is the next chapter, Yetze, and then it talks about in the next chapter how Jacob actually goes out on his way and ultimately goes to Haran to find and build his family. So Vayishlach Yitzchak sends Vayishlach. And you'll find the idea, so many times in the Torah, the idea of being sent on a mission. And if you think about it, a mission gives one context and focus. Why? Because when you don't sense you're on a mission, you could be going in this direction, that direction. When you know this is your mission, this is your objective, this is your calling, then everything you're doing is focused toward that end in mind. You may be doing many different activities, but you know where you're headed, because there's a purpose for that, for your life and for your general activities and everything that you will be involved in, which gives that type of sense that no matter where you go and who you meet and any interaction, it's directed toward fulfilling that purpose. And we're told that Yaakov, even though he went to Haran, Haran means wrath, a difficult place which reflects the wrath, the hostility, and difficulty of this world that each of us are enter into. It's a world that is not always pleasant. It's a world that people are not always nice and kind. People can be very selfish and very, very hurtful, and much injustice. Kol hadrachim b'cheskas sakana, all the paths are filled with danger. It's a world of unknown, and so on. And at the same time, we always remember where we come from Be'er Sheva. That's where they were living, Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva means the fountain of seven. And as Chassidic and Kabbalistic and Chassidic texts explain, Be'er Sheva reflects the source of all souls, comes from the seven dimensions, the seven spheres in Atzilus. That's the fountain of seven. So you have both elements necessary. You must know that you're going on a mission. The mission is not always an easy one, and the mission has its challenges, but you are connected to, and never forget that you're connected to the messenger that has sent you, God, who gives you the power to descend into this world. And even if you don't always feel it, know that you're always connected to that. So that's lesson number 1, chapter Toldos, Pasha Toldos. It's really the end of the chapter. But when you go a little earlier in the chapter, of course, you read the entire story of the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twins, the alter egos, one the warrior, the other the scholar. One was Ish Milchama, Yedid Tzayid, a warrior who was a hunter, who knew how to entrap, who was the shrewd one, who knew how to hunt and conquer. And then you have Yaakov, Yeshiv Aholim. Yaakov was a Ish Tam, Yeshiv Aholim. He was an innocent person, a simple person, simple in the sense of not complicated in knowing the ways of the world. And Yeshiv Aholim, a dweller of the tents, meaning he was a scholar and a student. And this, of course, reflects two parts of each of our souls, our animal soul and our divine soul. Both are necessary. To live in this world, you have to know how to hunt. You have to know how to survive. You have to know how to protect yourself. At the same time, to maintain our integrity, we have to have the Be'er Sheva within us. Not just the Charan, but the Be'er Sheva, which is the integrity of our soul, of our scholarship, of our innocence. And these two come together, and they are in mortal battle, as the Torah tells us about the pregnancy of Rebecca, where she had these two children within her, and she was a very difficult pregnancy, and she asked God why. And God said, Lu'um yamotz. You have two nations inside of you that are at war. And when one rises, the other one will fall, and when the other one rises, this one will fall. The animal and divine soul are in perpetual battle within each of us, each one demanding our attention, one wanting survival, the other one searching for transcendence. And every one of us, that struggle reflects itself in all the struggles that we go through in life. And we have to know that is the purpose, as explained in Tanya at length. That exactly is the purpose, to have that struggle. But to know that you can win, and you can vanquish, and not just vanquish, but sublimate the animal soul. So they have the entire chapter, of course, one of the most controversial stories in the Torah, where you have Jacob not once but twice fooling Esau, first in buying the birthright when he was a hot day and he had worked hard in the fields, and he came in came in and was looking for something to eat, and Jacob offered him broth, but only if he sells him his birthright, and Esau complied. And then again later in the chapter, in an even more aggressive way, where Rebecca was in on it, and the blessings that Isaac was intending for Esau was given to Jacob. Jacob stole the blessings and essentially, if you think about it, it seems like so inappropriate. People talk about an innocent Ish Tam, Yeshiv Aholim, and with his mother to fool their father. So there's a beautiful analogy from the Baal Shem Tov that can be applied to this, that really tells the story of our lives. And here you see how the story in this week's chapter is really the story of our lives, personal lives. And the analogy he gives, the Baal Shem Tov, is of a king, an ailing and aging king, who, knowing that his time is coming, wants to groom and prepare his son to be the heir to the throne. But he was also aware, and sensitively aware, that his son was not prepared for it, because he had lived his entire life in the palace. He was somewhat spoiled. He wasn't tested. So the father, as painful as it was, makes a decision. He's going to send his son away from the palace to a distant land in the empire, where he has to earn his own way, where he has to live among the subjects that he will one day rule over, where he has to live in the regular life without all the amenities and all the pleasantries that you receive as a prince in the palace. So the day comes and he tells the son, I'm sending you away, not sending you away to cause you pain, I'm sending you away to learn the ways of the world, to be there. So you should really learn to be sensitive and understand the world and understand the people on their terms, so then when you come back, you can lead them properly with the right compassion and right sensitivity. But being fully aware, the king, that the son will go off and may forget where he comes from, he says to the son, I will send you, as a gift, I will send you 3 times a year a letter reminding you who I am. Okay, the day comes, the son is sent off, and yes, first it's difficult, but then he settles in, begins to assimilate his ways to the ways of the land in which he lived, and becomes one of the folk. No one knows who he is. And then he receives the letters. He does forget where he comes from, and then he receives the letters from his father. And as he receives the letter, he wants to celebrate. He wants to celebrate because now he remembers. He's reminded of where he comes from. But how do you celebrate out here? Nobody knows who he is. No one will appreciate what he has to say. He tells them, I'm going to be your next king. That may think he's crazy, or they will be offended. So he comes up with a great idea. His idea is this. He throws a party, free food, free cocktails on me. So the whole town, great, let's party together. And they do so. So they're dancing and singing and celebrating because they received a free party, a free kiddush, free cocktails. And he meanwhile is celebrating because he received a letter from his father. And the Baal Shem Tov concludes this is an analogy. The king is God. The soul is the child. The soul living in heaven is in the palace. Everything is comfortable there. There are no challenges in the heavenly domain, in the cosmic worlds, in the higher cosmic worlds. But the father wants to send the child into this world to test it, to show that what it can really do, because there's no big achievement. So he sends it into a world, and we are made to forget. We learned the entire Torah in our mother's womb, and then we're made to forget, as the angel says, shh. And we consciously forget everything we learned, consciously. And then, however, God sends us a letter several times a year. These are the holidays. If you add Shabbos, it's more than several times a year, 52 times a year. And God sends us reminders saying, remember where you come from. Remember what you're being groomed for. Remember the purpose and mission of your life, your mission of your life. And when we receive the letter, we want to celebrate. However, we have a body. We're living among folks. We're living among peasants. We're living among a world that worships materialism. What are we going to do? And we don't want to ignore them. We don't want to offend them. So what do? We celebrate. On Shabbos, we have a meal. We invite guests on holidays. And what do? We give them drinks. We feed the body. We make it feel happy on its terms. So the body and the animal soul are happy because they're getting free drinks and they feel it's a special day. And the soul, meanwhile, celebrates because it received a letter from his father. So this is how it works. Jacob is the soul. Esau is the body. The soul enters into a body. They are like twins in a way. They both are necessary, because in this world we need to have a body to affect the physical world. The soul can't do so without the tools, without the vehicle, without the instruments of the human body and its limbs and so on. But living in this material world, we forget where we come from. And then when we remember, what we do is, what do we do with Esau? Esau is not interested in this purpose. Esau is interested in being a hunter. There's a purpose in the hunting, but he doesn't know that purpose. So Jacob, the soul, tells the body, here's what we do. You take the broth, and I'll take the birthright. The birthright, I'm holding it in safekeeping for both of us. But the soul has to be the one that guides the body, not the body guiding the soul. And the same thing with the blessings. Isaac felt that Esau could be refined, and it will be in the Messianic age, so he sensed that he can give the blessing straight to Esau. But Rebecca, the mother, the sensitive mother, who knew the situation a little clearer and not just saw the future, the vision that Isaac saw, she saw the facts on the ground, she told Jacob, no, right now you have to put on the garments of Esau. You have to dress up in his garments, speak in his language, Kel Yaakov, but Yadayim Yidei Esau, and speak in the language in the sense that feed the body, do what has to be done in the terms of Esau, but always remember that the goal is that the soul be the one that directs the body. And thus the entire chapter takes on a whole different life, because the bottom line is it reflects the purpose of life. It's not meant to steal the blessings from Esau. It's meant to take those blessings and safekeep, so when the day will come when they will reconcile, as we read later in Parsha Vayishlach, it says that Esav reconciles with Jacob, and then Esav says to Jacob, let's live side by side. Jacob says, you go ahead. I have to go slowly because the children are young, the sheep are tender. We're not yet ready to live side by side. The material world and the spiritual world are still at odds, and still at battle. But the day will come, as Rashi explains, where we will be able to refine the material world. And that's when the blessings and the first birth and the birthright will all come to fruition, soul and body together. So there you have a beautiful story of our own personal lives. We need to live in this world. We need to engage with it, but we have to always remember that it's only a means, it's only a stepping stone to Be'er Sheva. It's only a stepping stone to transforming the world into a divine home, each in our own particular way. Rosh Chodesh Kislev this week is also the day, especially in Chabad, besides being the Rosh Chodesh, the day in 1978, I should say 1977, Tov Shel Lamed Ches, after the Rebbe had a heart attack on that Shmini Atzeres. So we're talking about 38 years ago, that the Rosh Chodesh Kislev was the first time the Rebbe went home. It was a Thursday night. I remember it very vividly. You can imagine the celebration, the Rebbe going home for the first time. The first time the Rebbe would come down to 770 for Farbrengen would be Yutas Kislev, 19 days after that. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev became a type of Chassidic holiday of redemption, which of course fits into the entire theme of this month. Yutas Kislev, of course, which is the redemption of the Alter Rebbe, and before that, well, later years, but an earlier day in the month, Tes Kislev, which is the Tes Kislev, which is the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe, also freed from prison, and Yud Kislev, the birthday and the Yartzeit of the Mittler Rebbe. So it's a holiday, it's a month filled with the Chassidic holidays, all connected to the ultimate holiday, which is the end of the month, on the 25th of Kislev, Chanukah, which is the celebrated through what? Through light, Shemen. Shemen, the oil, is Pnimius HaTorah, just like an olive conceals the oil within, so too the outer dimension of Torah conceals the oil within, which is the inner dimension of Torah, which is ultimately the tool in Torah that allows us to transform the material world into a spiritual abode. So there you have a certain, hopefully a brief and meaningful summary of the Chassidic take, Chassidus Applied, to Toldos and to Rosh Chodesh, and to Kislev in general, and Rosh Chodesh Kislev in particular. So let's move into now some questions here. Let's start with feedback. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I truly enjoy your MyLife Chassidus Applied classes. You answer questions many of us confused younger light struggle with. It seems to me to properly learn Chassidus, you have to be knowledgeable in many areas to understand the concepts. Now, I have this problem, and many others I know have this problem as well, where yes, you can scan over the daily Tanya, but do we really understand it? I don't think so. I don't know how to ask because I know your plate is quite full, but taking my life to the next level, can you please start a similar style class with questions and answers going through Tanya in depth? Tanya is the Aleph Beis of Chassidus, and unfortunately many of us young souls struggle to understand what the Alter Rebbe said and how to implement it in our practical lives. Thank you for taking my recommendation into consideration. There have actually been a number of questions of this sort over the months, and I feel honored that you have the trust that I can do something of this nature. You know, my goal with MyLife Essays Applied is not just that I do this, but hopefully inspire others to do similarly, because Chassidus is for all of us, and it's a treasure meant to be tapped into and actualized and applied in every possible way. The MyLife Essay Contest, which was hugely successful, in a sense, brought out 530 gems of essays, people all attempting and very well presenting Chassidus in different fashion, and I hope we can create a revolution out of this. I definitely will take your recommendation in consideration. I can tell you the good news is I am working on a curriculum based on the Chassidus Applied Approach, which is really taking Chassidus and applying it to life, but in a curriculum form for students. And Tanya, of course, is always reigns supreme in the sense of being Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus, the written Torah of Chassidus. So clearly it's part of the whole picture, and I'll keep posted. But I would say, just as I'm being asked to do what I have to do, that everyone out there, everyone listening to this, should feel not just the responsibility to listen, but also, more importantly, the responsibility to do, to act, to be each of you in your own way, shluchim, shluches, ambassadors, to take the treasures of chassidus that the Rabbeim gave us and do in every possible way, whether it's in our personal lives, in our homes, with our young children, with older children, whether it's those of us that are teachers or educators, everyone in their own way, at work, in every given situation, to try to take chassidus and show how it applies to any particular area of life and can elevate it, can enrich it, and introduce a new dimension, which essentially is how we bring the Geula, through Masenu Avadesenu, by entering the Aleph of Geula, of Alufi Shalelam, of Achdus Hashem, and introducing it into Geula, into Golus, which is the concealment, and then you can create Geula through that, as we shall soon be discussing. Okay. And another follow-up, why is the Rebbe Rashab called the Rambam of Chassidus? In episode 88, you said that the Rebbe Rashab can be compared to the Rambam. Can you bring some examples of how we see the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus in a Seder like the Rambam? Yes, this is not I said, it comes from the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the name of Chassidim, that the Rebbe Rashab, they call the Rambam of Chassidus. It's an excellent question. Many people have it. Many people don't even think about it. They just think that we're told that's how it is. But it's a very good question, because if you ostensibly look at the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus, what you see most is not a code. You know, the Rambam, at the end of the day, what he did was, and there's plenty of chidushim in the Rambam, but what he did was he took all of Shas, as he writes in his introduction, everything from the Rabbanon Savaroi and the Ge'onim and the Rishonim until him, and turned it into a code. Yada Chazaka, Sefer Mishnah Torah, 14 Sfarim, in a structured way. So even though Shas is technically also structured, Shishas Dorim, and Masechta Shabbos and so on, but we all know Masechta Shabbos you could have about Chanukah, which it does have, and you could have about the laws of Erevin and laws of Gittin and laws of anything. The Rambam made it and organized and was the first codifier. When you look at the Rebbe Rashab, what you see ostensibly is that he's bevayed everything, has brought in a flaw, unbelievable explanation in the Sugyas of Chassidus. The Rambam, though he definitely adds, by codifying, you see Chidushim and you see the comments and you see the commentaries on the Rambam, how the Rambam's understanding of Shas, of the different Sugyas, he definitely adds a whole dimension, but it's not the only focus. Here's the real organization of the structure of it, and in the process there's a certain depth. You can actually say other Rishonim probably maybe more masbirim, more hasbirim, more pilpul, and more explanation. So what does it mean that is the Rambam of Chassidus? I had this question myself until I started learning Ayin Beis. Samach Vov, you see it to some extent, but in Ayin Beis it's obvious if you learn with some type of depth. Ayin Beis, besides the depth of the Hemshech, where it goes into everything, Ayin Beis, let me just explain, Ayin Beis is the Hemshech Terav. It's called Ayin Beis by the year that was said, which was 5762, Tov Reish Ayin Beis, or Terav, which would be equivalent to the year 1912, which now we're already 4 years later, 1915, 1916, which is a Tov Shin Ayin Vov, which is because the Hemshech continued for a number of years. So in Ayin Beis, you see literally, when you start looking up where the Rebbe Rashab is taking the Inyanim from, that he's literally taking the sugyas. Sugya means the concepts, themes, from the Rabbeim before him, starting from the Alter Rebbe, going all the way till the Rebbe Marash, and organizing them and connecting them. You don't see this elsewhere. You see sugyas. You see a maimer that talks Yesh Ma'ayin. You have a maimer that talks about Matan Torah. You have a maimer that talks about the Ovis. You have a maimer that talks about Keser. You have a maimer that talks about Pnimius, Makifim and Pnimius. All type of sugyas. But no one has ever connected them in a flow. And the Rebbe Rashab, besides, as I said, the depth and explanation, is literally taking all these themes and putting them in a flow. When you read them, they're actually taking themes, and I have no doubt that most of the themes of Chassidus are in Ayin Beis. I have not yet identified them all personally because I haven't learned it all at that type of level. But so far, what I've seen through Volume 1 and the beginnings of Volume 2, it's very, very clear. And you could actually find those Maimorim, and you see him connecting it all in the understanding of it. So though it's Pnimis HaTeira as opposed to Nigla, so you can't say it's the Rambam in the sense like the Rambam of Nigla, because Chassidus wouldn't be structured in that type of way. Chassidus is not like an encyclopedia, even though the Rebbe instructed to make an encyclopedia, but encyclopedia is for the use of people to be able to access it. It's a sophisticated index, so to speak. But Chassidus, being Divrei Elokim Chaim, the Rebbe Rashab did it in the language of Chassidus and Maimonim in Ayin Beis, and when now you go back to Samach Vav, you see similar idea, not to the same scope, because he doesn't bring so many themes, but Ayin Beis literally takes themes, sugyas themes, Eifun, exactly as it says in the Sikh, that's what the Rambam did, takes the sugyas of Chassidus, brings them all together, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzaddik, the Rebbe Marash, and organizes them in a flow. Again, it's not identified where you could say, okay, here's the sugya one and ends in this, exactly this place, but when you start looking deeper, you could do that actually as well. And connects it all in the most eloquent fashion. That's the best way I can explain it, and obviously I'm open to hear any other explanations on it. But this is a very, very obvious way, and that fits, of course, in the style of Chassidus. Next question. This is also a follow-up. I spoke about Israel, the Rebbe's approach to Israel. What would it be like this time of time, through the challenges they're going through? And again, there's been a good opportunity to extend our prayers and heart and wishes, best wishes for all our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. They should protect them, and especially in a land where Eretz Hashem, Ein Hashem Elokecha Bo Meresh Hashem V'Ad Achar Shana, and we should do our part, B'Gashmis and B'Ruchnis, to support in every possible way people who are our own brothers and sisters and are in some way endangered due to the fact that they are Jews in the Holy Land. So there's some follow-up questions that are not connected particularly to these times. So I'll address some of them, and those that I don't have time to address, you can see this as part of an ongoing series that will be addressed in future episodes. Okay. What is the Chabad stance on Israel and Zionism? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I took part in a rally in Manhattan in support of Israel, and as usual there was opposing demonstration of Arabs. As usual there was Neturi Karta together with Arabs calling for destruction of the Zionist state. Their standing with our enemies is painful and embarrassing. But I also saw on a website called TrueTorahJews.com quotes from many Rabbeim, including previous Rebbe and Rebbe Rashab, on the issue a prohibition on establishing a Jewish state until the coming of Moshiach. If we are to follow the Talmud in Ksubis 111a Kuf Yud Aleph, then it is forbidden. If not, are we supporting the state of Israel? Then we are in opposition to all the Rabbeim who said that it's forbidden to establish a state. There were no Orthodox Jews in the crowd supporting state of Israel. They were on the other side condemning it. Please clarify this issue. Okay. I don't recall if I used this platform here at all to talk about this. I definitely spoke about it in different venues, but let me briefly state the following. Without going into a whole elaborate discussion of all the different opinions and different shittas, that when so-called secular Zionism began to rise at the end of the 19th century, yes, there were those that were adamantly opposed to the whole thing. There were those that were completely pro. In the Frum world, there was called religious Zionists. The Rebbe Rashab himself initially was part of the founders of Agudas Yisrael, being so-called a religious camp that would not support the state of Israel in any, God forbid, a non-halachic way, but to use the opportunity to use it to advance Yiddishkeit and Torah. And then the Rebbe Rashab chose to opt out and did write a famous letter that's printed in Kunter Samayim. That's a very strong attack on the secular Zionist vision of what they want to achieve. And there are different variations. So you bring the example of people marching with Palestinians or marching with Arabs and Iranians. I would say they're completely out of the pale, and that Bechlal is not a shitta. There's no one, even the most extreme anti-Zionist Torah ones, would ever march with Nazis or march people who are calling for the death of Jews. That's just plain insanity, and I don't want to waste time to use this the venue of Applied Chassidus to talk about it. But since you brought up the question, it's completely off the reservation, and not just an embarrassment, achil Hashem in every possible way. And even the most adamant anti-Zionist forces that go back a few generations, whether it was Neturi Karta of Rabbi Amram Bloy or the Satmar Rebbe and others, would have absolutely been appalled by any type of behavior like that, and nothing was ever closely resembled that. So that being said, let's talk about the Chabad approach. Chabad approach is actually, if you think, quite sophisticated and a balancing approach. It's not a compromising approach. Obviously, it's very clear, and let me make a state for the record, Chabad Chassidus The Chabad Rabbeim is one is part and parcel, one with Torah. Chassidus is not some chiddush from some human beings in the last generations. Chabad Chassidim, the Rabbeim, Chassidus, Divrei Elokim Chaim, was given at Matan Torah. Every time, every generation has its time when certain Torah is revealed. Pnimis HaTorah is not a chiddush of our times. The chiddush is mitzvah legalis, zeisach chachma, legalis, to reveal, as the Arizal said. And then the Baal Shem Tov hearing from Moshiach, chutza. And the Rabbeim and the Alter Rebbe especially vindicated after the Yutas Kislev Geula to continue spreading. But it's Pnimius HaTorah, but what the Zohar calls the soul, Nishmosa Daraisa of the body. So let's make it very clear. There's no new Torah, God forbid. It's all part of Chassidus, is part of Torah. So any shita, any derech of the Rabbeim, including the Rebbe, is based on Torah, and Chaz v'Shalom, Rachmana litzlan, you can't even consider that it's anything that is contrary to any halacha. Concerning Eretz Yisrael, the Rebbe makes it very clear in his letter to Shazar, President Shazar. He calls it Eretz Yisrael, and President Shazar was offended when he said, "Why do you call it Medinas Yisrael? In the way you're depriving me, I swore my loyalty to Medinas Yisrael, to the state of Israel, and you're calling it Eretz Yisrael." And the Rebbe writes briefly, I'm just summing up, it's a long letter actually, the Rebbe writes that on the contrary, Medinas Yisrael goes back to 1948, and based on a declaration and a vote in the UN. And based on a declaration, the Balfour Declaration in the early 20th century. Whereas Eretz Yisrael, I'm giving you even more. Eretz Yisrael goes back thousands of years. So it's on the contrary. It's a far larger scope of our relationship with this country. So that's very telling of the approach. Now, before 1948, you could argue that Al Pi Torah, yes, we should not establish a memshala, a Torah Jewish memshala in Eretz Yisrael until Moshiach comes. Nicht mit unseren Rotzen sind wir gegangen in Goals, nicht mit unseren Rotzen will man gehen. God decides. And therefore, you can make an argument of an opposition to that type of movement. It's not necessarily an opposition to Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, that Ramban and Shalah and hundreds and thousands of others made it their goal to try to, at the end of their lives, to live and be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael remains a holy land. Kedusha le'zazim kema. We're talking about establishing rulership, a sovereignty. That you can make the argument before 1948. Whether we like it or not, 1948, a state was established. So even if you are opposed to that concept, but the fact of the matter is, it became a government there. Why should this government be less than any type of Jewish community council in France, in New York, or in Australia? Because what is their role? Is to legislate, is to give services and utilities to the country, to protect the country, and so on. So, without necessarily giving it halachic or messianic or spiritual value, it's no less than any other entity that has got together to protect Jews, to serve Jews. And there are many Jews that were there then, 600,000, whatever the amount was. Now it came over 6 million, and it's become a mokem Torah. So to go ahead and suddenly go to war against those that are creating that type of service, even if you don't agree with their policy, that doesn't mean that that in other words, going along and cooperating does not mean that you support them giving it any type of religious and messianic element. Now there were religious Zionists, I'm not going into, this is not the place, that did believe it had certain redemptive elements, as Chalta de Gula, Rav Kook and others, Kasher. But as the Rebbe's approach is, therefore, to be there, to take benefit, to pay taxes, to vote, and to make a positive influence on the government and on the people in Israel, Jews, who should be taught and educated what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a Torah Jew, and everyone growing and coming a point where we're all ready to go to the Geula, and then Moshiach will become Taka, the first real Torah Memshala since there's Man Abayis. This is briefly the Shita. So, as I said, completely off the ridiculous to even talk about, ridiculous, painful to talk about what you mentioned about those that marched. As far as the support, it's a support, but it doesn't necessarily have to be infused with any type of religious or deeper significance. Now, some people may be offended hearing that. So be it. They have a different opinion, they have a different view, but we have a Rebbe. This is how the Rebbeim proposed it. Now, this has nothing to do with individuals. Every individual Jew, whether he's in the government or not government. That's why the Rebbe met government people. They're Jewish. Just because they're part of the government doesn't mean they can't have impact, and doesn't mean you shouldn't be influencing them. Meeting someone doesn't mean that you're endorsing everything about them. The Rebbe supported President Shazar, Eretz Yisrael. So I think enough said about that. As far as participating, and what extent of participating in activities around that, the support of Eretz Yisrael, especially the soldiers of Israel, who are literally Meiser Nefesh, personally, for the life of others, is they're sacred people, they're martyrs. No matter what their background is like. No matter whether they're complete Shemet HaMitzvah, is no different than a doctor that saves someone's life, regardless of his own disposition or his own belief system and so on. Especially we consider, and we know that every Jew is a real believer, Maminim B'nei Maminim, and our job is to reveal that through our efforts, positive efforts in influencing everyone. So that's briefly a take on this. There are more questions on the topic. As I said, because of time, I think we've covered this, and I'll cover more as we go along, if you don't mind. Okay. I should add one more thing. I will add the Rebbe's position about Siman Shin Chavtes. So the Rebbe's approach, therefore, is, what's our approach? Now when there's a situation like it is now in Israel, where we see danger and we see challenges, the Rebbe had a position and tried to influence the government, the position of strength, to negotiate out of strength, not to give up land for peace, but peace for peace, and saw any type of concession and any type of weakness as actually feeding the enemy. And unfortunately, what we see now is a direct result, as the Rebbe pointed out many times, of that weakness. So there's a role to play. To sit now and start bickering whether we agree in all the philosophical and religious views is not the time. Now the time is to create unity and to create positive influence to make sure that the policies of the country are such that will protect for now and sustainable for forever the Jewish people that living, the millions of Jews that are living there. So I just wanted to add that. Okay. Next question. What will practically change when Moshiach comes? We daven and ask for Moshiach several times every day. It is one of the fundamental principles of Jewish faith. We are told that we are at the threshold of the Geula. We teach it to our children. But how are we to understand Mashiach's coming in practical terms? What will the world look like then? How will it actually be different than life today? Can you please clarify and help us visualize in a very practical and realistic way what life will be like if Mashiach would actually come tomorrow? What will my daily material life and my mundane chores look like? Will I have a mortgage and bills to pay? At this point, Mashiach seems like an esoteric and abstract concept. How can we understand Mashiach in ways that fit into our day-to-day grind and make it something we can relate to in this lifetime? I'm certain that applying Mashiach to our personal lives will help people actually want it and mean it when they ask for it. Another questioner in the same vein. I would love if you can cover this topic of explaining Mashiach, because I hear all the painful topics you try to shed light on. I really pray for Mashiach's coming and hope that will resolve so many of them. But will his coming actually put an end to all these challenges? Another question in this vein. In Tavshin Nun Aleph 5751, the Rebbe spoke how the world is gearing up towards Mashiach, and that America is a Malchus Shel Chesed, etc. But today you look at how terribly corrupt the world is. We're giving marriage rights to same gender, calling terrorists freedom fighters, etc., etc. I talked with my sister the other day. She says that in 5751 it was an opportunity for Mashiach to come, that we missed out. I try to convince her that we are still living in that same time, and that Mashiach is coming any second. Please clarify. Okay. This is a big topic. It's excellent questions because this lies at the heart, and I would say the ultimate mission. I mentioned before mission statement, mission, shlichus. So in all the shlichusim, which include the Miftzayim and the Limud HaTorah and Rambam and everything that Rebbe instituted and established and made this Sivus Hashem for the Neshei B'neis Yisrael, for men, for Tiferes Kenim, the list goes on. What is the heart of it all? As the Rebbe said in the first Maimer Bas Lagani, Deir Shvi, we are the Deir Shvi. To bring the Shekhinah down the Mata, the last Deir in Golas, the first Deir of Gula. And this was the undercurrent of the Rebbe's entire leadership. And late Mems, when the Rebbe started talking strongly, in mid-Mem, early Mems, the 80s, started talking about Shav Mitzvah Zeineyach. Each tkufa, each period of the Rebbe's leadership had different focuses or foci, whatever you would call it. And finally, in the late 80s, when the Rebbe started accelerating and intensifying to talk about Gula Mashiach, it was very clear that mission was coming to its culmination. We're at the threshold, the Rebbe said, Imdu hachin kulchem, Shensugi puts the kneplach. We finished all the birurim. All we have to do is open our eyes. The world is ready. The list goes on in the Rebbe's expressions. So this clearly is the core mission of it all. And Taka in the Kinnis HaShluchim, the last one that we heard from the Rebbe until today, Tav Shinun Beis, Chayesada, that's how the Rebbe started the whole, he said the beginning of the Kinnis is right now in the Fabrengen. The first thing we have to do is establish the mission of the Shluchim, and that is, everything has been finished. Now the mission is the Kabul Pnei Mashiach Sidkenu. However we explain it. So, but it's critical, therefore, to address this topic. I would address it even more than I have, and I thank you for the opportunity to now address it based on this question. Because the big question is, what can we do? When the Rebbe says Miftzat film, every man and boy after Bar Mitzvah should put on film, it's very practical. You find them, find some way to influence, inspire, get put on film. Neshek is practical in that same sense. It's tangible, it's identifiable, everyone knows what has to be done. It doesn't take rocket science to understand what the mission is in each of those mivtzaim. And the same thing with others, mivtza teira, mivtza chinuch, and mivtza, I'm just going in all the orders, bayis malis forim, mivtza mezuzah, mivtza kashrus, mivtza taras mishpacha. All the 10 mivtzaim are all clear. Comes to Mashiach, what is it we have to exactly do? Mashiach is more than an action. Mashiach is a whole state of being. It's a new world. A world of Gula Amitis Vashlema, led by Mashiach Tzidkenu individual. So what is it? So the Rebbe said, Lilmid in Yoni Gula Mashiach. Made it very clear after Chav Chesnis and Nun Aleph, the Shabbos after, Sazir Mitzeda, and so on, that year, 1991. He made it very clear to learn in Yoni Gula Mashiach, and said, not as a Zgula. It's not like, I'll give tzedakah, and tzedakah is a Zgula, a so-called a charm to be able to achieve other things. I don't know if that's the right word for Zgula, but you get the idea. No, Limud Yoni Gula Mashiach is because if you don't learn it, you don't understand it, and you don't relate to it, you can't live it. And if you can't live it, we're not doing our part in experiencing and having a taste of that type of life. So understanding what the Geula is like and what will happen when Mashiach comes tomorrow, is critical for us to visualize and imagine and then make it part of our reality. So let's look in two places, the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, Tanya. The Rambam, the last two prokim of the Rambam, last two chapters, especially the last chapter, Yud Beis in Hilchos Malachim, and the Alter Rebbe, Perek, chapter 36 and 37. So what does the Rambam say? Lo yeh kol ha'olam el ladasas Hashem b'lvad. Mashiach doesn't have to do meifsim miracles. That's a later stage. The initial stage is that the entire world's preoccupation will be nothing but to know God. What about our work? What about all the activities? What will we be doing tomorrow morning? Mashiach comes. So the Rambam doesn't say there won't be work. He doesn't say there won't be any material world. But the focus, that will be a means. Instead of materialism being an end in itself, it will be a stepping stone, a means to spiritual awareness, if you want to put it that way, divine knowledge. Later he brings, of course, the Pasuk. That's how he concludes the entire Perek and the entire Yad HaChazak Mishnah Torah. Mol Odes Deis Hashem, the entire world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. All people, not just Jews. And Jews will be Chachamim v'Nevenim, as he articulates there. In the language of Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe, Perek Lamed Zayin, after explaining in chapter 36 what is the purpose of creation, and by Matan Torah we already had a taste of it, the purpose is to make a dira, a home for God in this material lowest of worlds. In Perek Lamed Zayin he begins. Now this Gili of Yemesa Mashiach and Tchis HaMesim, which is Gili Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Gashmi, the divine revelation in this world. That's how he defines Geula, Mashiach. This comes through Ma'aseinu v'Avodaseinu, through our actions. Why? Because every mitzvah releases Gilei Ein Sof. As I mentioned earlier, it's like a small building block, a small release of energy. And cumulatively, all those energies gathered together, that changes the world and changes its consciousness. The language of the Rambam, only to know God. What does this mean in practical terms? Let's visualize it. So I want to refer you to a sikha, very good sikha. I think every sikha is good, but this one regarding this topic, I'm talking now the year Tavshin Nun Aleph, again that same year, 5751, 1991. The sikha Achrei Kadeshim Yud Gimel Ir. So the Rebbe defines exactly what it is by using the words Geula and Geula. Geula is Geula, same letters as Golas, with one change, a letter Aleph. What does the letter Aleph do? It takes a world that exists and just adds one thing. What's the purpose of it? Today you go to work in order to make money. You socialize in order to make friends. We do all kinds of things. We eat in order because we're hungry, to get stronger. You add Aleph, you add the divine dimension. Why do you work? Not just to make money, in order to elevate the workplace, the people you meet, the work itself. Now, can we do the entirely 24/7? Everything we do with that type of Aleph consciousness, you're taking what you have and adding that dimension. To the extent that the Rebbe said that with this, and this I was reading now page 505 in the Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Nun Aleph Chelik Beis. On page 515, it says, first of all, we have an answer to those that wonder and are afraid, they're frightened of that we're studiming. The Rebbe is studiming. The Rebbe is, how do you say studiming? I guess, studiming is studiming. Clamoring, intensifying, crying out, that every Jew that has to do everything possible to bring the Gula. So people are afraid. And being they're often mentioned, the Rebbe says, they're open, they're not fearful. They express in speech their wonder and their concern. What do they express? Moshiach with Baal Kumen. What's going to be, they ask, with all the activities and all the equity and everything I built up all the years in Golos. The Geschäft in my businesses that they built up, the Rechush and the Chosim, the property and possessions that they acquired, the friends that they developed, both between Jews and non-Jews. What will happen with all of this? That's what they're afraid. And the Rebbe says the answer of them, the answer is don't be afraid. Geula is not that you will eliminate minhag shalelam, everything that's happening, the world order. It will not destroy the world order and all the good things that were accomplished. Adrabah, Geula it includes all of Geula. It's everything in Geula plus something. In a way that they get lifted to a situation of Geula, to a Geula-dika situation. Now we can get accustomed to the darkness, which we have done, and we can think it's pretty comfortable now. No, it's not comfortable until it's fulfilling its ultimate purpose. So what that means in practical terms, that there will be birds chirping, there'll be a sky tomorrow morning, we'll still have work, we'll do the things we're doing, but it'll be infused with a higher awareness that it's all a means to a higher end. I believe I shared this. I once spoke at a doctor's conference. They wanted to speak what the future of, what will healing and medicine look like when Moshiach comes. So I elaborated on the whole discussion that there will no longer be illness and disease and death, because the body and soul will be completely united, no punctures in the body. So why should the soul have to seep out through illness and death from the body? They can live on, like before Chet Eitzadas, before the eating of the tree of knowledge, that live forever. Okay. One doctor got up and said, so what will happen with us doctors? So after the prerequisite joke that maybe that's why doctors charge so much to save for a long retirement, I said, you'll have the greatest job of all. B'psari erze leka, for my flesh I behold God. God created the human being b'tselem elikim, in the divine image. You will teach us this cosmic secrets of the divine. L'dases Hashem b'lvad. You'll teach us God's mysteries through the anatomy and the biology and the chemistry and everything you know about the medicine of the human body and the brain and everything. And the same thing with astronomers and scientists, and the same thing with engineers, and the same thing with psychologists, and the same thing with everyone in their particular expertise. Everyone. will be able to teach us, and that's what we'll be focusing on, not on the item itself, but how it helps us connect to the higher presence. Now, this may not be realistic for many people because we're not accustomed to it, but it's not something completely leiracheki. This is not beyond us. This is what requires. Learning Chassidus helps you visualize this, what the world will look like. Same world, but a completely different consciousness, completely different awareness. And we have examples for it. Think of moments in your life where you feel you completely belong. And there are moments where we feel lost, where we feel that our activities, what we do, is not aligned with who we are. Moshiach is what you do is aligned with who you are, who you really are, and the purpose of your life. A company that's not living up to its mission statement is misaligned, and therefore off track. Geula, Moshiach, is a company, a machine called life, aligned to its mission, to its purpose, to its operator's manual, called Teda. So today, we feel hunger when our bodies are hungry. We don't feel soul's hunger. As I mentioned before, the analogy, because God concealed from us that hunger. Mashiach comes, your soul will feel hungry, and you'll sense it, you'll feel it. So we'll be aligned with the divine, a divine alignment between our physical realities and our spiritual realities. I can elaborate more, but that I believe is, hopefully for now, should suffice. And just to add, to answer the second question, there's no question, the clock doesn't go backwards. If the Rebbe said the Geula, we're ready for the Geula 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Now we're even more ready, because it doesn't go backwards. The world only gets more refined, it can't get less refined. The fact that you may see some setbacks, or you may see different challenges as you describe, the Rebbe puts that into the category of Yizbaru v'Yislabna Advarim, better to see the problems than not to see them. So yes, when you come to the conclusion of a situation, sometimes the grime begins to emerge from the deeper pores of Golus, and that's part of the process, is to at least awareness, is have the cure. Okay. As I said, this is a topic that deserves more to be discussed, so more to come, but let's suffice, as I said, for now. Next. How to decline a handshake like a chossid. Torah mandates rules that govern our interactions with the opposite gender, such as the laws of yichud and shemer negiah. Just to translate, yichud means being alone and all the details involved of two opposite genders that are not married. And shemer negiah literally means to protect from touch of the opposite gender, not in the right circumstance, meaning not in marriage, and not in marriage itself also, in the right times and the right conditions. When working in the secular world as a shliach, a professional, or in any capacity, we inevitably interact with the opposite gender. How do we find the proper balance between following halachic standards, as in not shaking hands, and not offending someone and creating a chilul Hashem? If someone sticks out your hand to you and ignoring them or pushing it away, can be offensive, is essentially, to put it in different terms. What suggestions can you offer as an appropriate and chassidish way to deal with these potentially awkward interactions? Another person writes, similar thing, I'm no longer in yeshiva, now working a pretty full-time job. I started very recently, and it requires me to interact with a lot of women. Whenever they come to shake my hand, I try to tell them very politely that I cannot shake their hands. I have yet to figure out how to do this in the most appropriate manner. I was wondering if there's a Chassidish approach in dealing with these situations. Yeah, very similar. And then there's more of the same spirit. Okay. So first let's begin with this. We always try to answer all these questions with the standards that the Rebbeim, Chassidus, and Teda, and Halacha give us. So I was looking from the Rebbe, and indeed found this letter from 1976, and I'm just going to read it straight, word for word. It's an English letter that, it doesn't say who it is, it says 1976, to someone in Brookline, Massachusetts. So after the Rebbe gives a bracha in response to just acknowledging her letter, the Rebbe adds P.S. With reference to the point you mentioned in your letter about some people displaying definite reservations which are required in accordance with our Torah, Teres Chaim, as for instance the matter of a friendly hug and kiss that you mentioned, it is surely superfluous to explain to you at length that the teachings of our Torah have been given not for God's benefit, but for the benefit of the person observing them. It is needless to add that when it concerns a married person, especially one whom the Torah calls Akeres Habayis. So Akeres Habayis means the foundation of the home, in other words, the woman. The said benefit is also for each and every one of the members of the family. Hence, of what significance in such a case can there be when someone out of ignorance claims that such practices, though God-given, should not be followed because of the external impressions that it might create, etc. So the Rebbe gives the general attitude that there's bigger things at stake, and the Torah and its halachas are not meant to be, they're meant to be for our benefit, and also the benefit of our families. In connection with the above, the Rebbe continues, I would like to cite an illustration which actually occurred recently. Several weeks ago, a delegation of Dutch Jews were officially received by the Queen of Denmark. They wished to express the Jewish gratitude to her for the help given by the royal family and people of Denmark. During the official reception, when everyone stood in line to shake hands with the Queen, as customary, and it came up to the turn of the rabbi and his wife, who were with that delegation, the Queen extended her hand. The rabbi's wife shook hands with the Queen, but the rabbi explained his reservation on religious grounds, which the Queen graciously accepted. There was no embarrassment. All the other men before and after the rabbi shook hands with the Queen. On the contrary, it produced admiration for the rabbi's convictions and principles. I mention these details so that you can also mention them whenever you find that the occasion calls for a better understanding of such matters. And then there's a very similar paralleling this letter. This is the letter of the Rebbe. Is a story with the Rabbi Aryeh Safran in London, who received a member of the British Empire award or symbolism or whatever it is for 18 years of his hard work at the head of drug and alcohol rehabilitation center that serves Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So he went, and you get this reward from the Queen of England. He was very anxious. He was interviewed about it, and let me just share what he said. What does he do if she reaches out and gives a handshake? Because that was actually what they told him in the etiquette of the palace. That's how you know that she's going to say a few words with you, and it will conclude when she stretches out her hand and gives a handshake. But don't worry, because she wears gloves. But to his chagrin, that day, she didn't wear gloves. He had been briefed on proper protocol, but did not know what's going to happen. But what happened was, she never stretched out her hand, because she had been apparently briefed about him, because at the end of their short meeting, the 83-year-old Queen Elizabeth did not stretch out her hand. And she just nodded, and he nodded to her and walked away. I've heard from people in different situations in government, whether it's Washington or others. Initially, it's very difficult and uncomfortable and awkward, especially when the president and the first lady have events, and like you're the only one that stands out. But essentially, if you go with a very straight, kol de poshet MyLife approach, which is, our religion mandates that men and women don't shake hands, without anything personalizing, people will respect it without any ums and buts and so on. And the Rebbe states it that way, and that's, I would say, is the Chassidic way to do it. Honestly, kindly, don't wait for an awkward situation. You could say it, you don't have to wait till somebody stretches out their hand. You can say it beforehand and not hope and pray that they just won't. And that's the simplest way, because if you do all the other things like hold something in both your hands or like ignore, make believe that you didn't see the hand, maybe one time you can get away with it, but it won't last. And the healthiest way is just to state it. And this is part of Torah, and that's that. I'm talking from the Chabad Chassidic way, how to do something of this nature. And if they want to have a deeper explanation, you can go into the sensitivity. On the contrary, for us, every interaction is not casual. Even a handshake is not a casual thing. It has deeper meaning, and therefore everything is infused with a deeper sensitivity. So, because of time limits, I got to go to the Chassidus question still, and to the essays, of course. So let me go straight to the Chassidus question, which is, I recently read a prominent mashpia's explanation that the Rebbe's contribution to the previous 6 generations of Chabad Chassidus is to fully integrate Chassidus into human intelligence to the point where you can convince yourself that the ideas are pure intelligence without sensing as much it's being beyond us, being elokus, in other words. In contrast to the previous Rebbeim, where you sense primarily how the ideas are beyond us, and they're being manifested in some way in intelligence. Would you agree with this analysis? Personally, I don't see I don't really see that element in the Rebbe's Maimorim. Rabbi Jacobson, how would you explain the Rebbe's contribution to Chassidus in context of the previous 6 generations? Okay. So I'm not going to comment on other mashpim. I don't know what the context was and so on, but I will say the following. I also don't see it to say that the Rebbe was the one that put it most in Seichel, the Maimorich Chassidus, in Sichos perhaps, not only perhaps for sure, because the Rebbe's elaboration, but the Maimorim are not necessarily more hasbara, for example, in the Rebbe Rashab. I'm talking about the Maimorim as they were said and so on. Someone sees it that way. I'm not going to argue if you feel that way. I would submit that the Rebbe's contribution, if you want to put it that way. Now we know all the Rabbeim are one, and if the Rebbe was in the time of the Alter Rebbe, he would say what the Alter Rebbe said, and the Alter Rebbe was in the Rebbe's times, he would say what the Rebbe said. Let's go to the Sfiris. If the Alter Rebbe is Malchus, Teir Hashvi, Malchus has a role. Malchus is the interface between Atzilus and Biyah. It takes all of Chassidus of the earlier 6 generations and puts it in a language that's palatable, relevant, and gives us the power to transform a secular world. The Alter Rebbe alone, the kavanah of his words was to do that. But without the Rebbe's explanations and without the Rebbe's style and methodology, it would be very difficult, I would say, for the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, who are speaking to people that don't know their language, don't know their paradigm, for them to be able to manifest it in that type of way. So I think it's very straightforward. Every Rebbe has the Alter Rebbe's chokhmah. The chokhmah is the nekudas haskola of Chassidus, establishes the basis. Mittel Rebbe bina harcheves hanor in bringing it into all kinds of explanations and connecting it and in depth and so on. Tzemach Tzedek had his role, das, which the Rebbe says connected to all pardes, the whole chelikei hatera. The Rebbe Marash, Netzach is not spoken about so much, his contribution, but when you start seeing it, he was the first that said Hamsheichim. He was the one that first began to bring it into Hasbara. I would say, like, if you say that it's Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek are Chabad, this is now already getting into Midas. Midas is what? It's more like the Rishenim and Achreinim, Kavyochel. Again, I never saw that, but you can say it's bringing it into more of a language of Havon and Hasbara that even the Nefesh Habamis could understand. And the Rebbe Rashab, of course, I discussed the Rambam, but also the elaboration of really turning it into a real sugya. That's something you can, and picking apart in thoroughness in every aspect and detail. The Frierdiker Rebbe, an extension, a continuation of that in many, many powerful ways. And now here is not the question, is not about the Frierdiker Rebbe, but the Rebbe taking all of that and channeling it, like Malchus, into a blueprint that we can use and explain to the world what Chassidus contributes. In those type of basis is specifically the Rebbe. Now, can you see it in all the Maimorim? Like anything, you don't see it necessarily in one Maimor, you see it in the collective Chassidus of the Rebbe. Okay. Let's go to the MyLife Essays, 3 essays. The first one, The Science of Motivation, by David Greenwald, age 24, assistant teacher, Brooklyn, New York. Again, a very, very good essay, I must say. And essentially the theme of this essay is basing it on the story with the Mittler Rebbe, the story with Rebbe Menachem Mendel, the brother of the Rebbe Rashab, who was excited to share, I believe it was the year Tov Reish Nun Hey, where he was excited to share about something he read in science of discoveries how the brain works. And the Rebbe Rashab quietly told him that this is already in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim, and he was very in his spall. He said, the Rebbe Rashab pulled out a sefer and showed it. The Rebbe Rashab said, he asked, how does he know the science? He says, because the human being was created b'tzelem Elokim, b'dugma the Adam Elyon to the Adam Elyon, and he knows it from there. That's how we know it's also in the Adam HaTacht. So based on this principle, he takes the midah of Netzach and brings a very secular application of achievement motivation, what he calls it, that those with a stronger drive, studies show, tend to succeed more. Now, where did this drive come from? For many people, it comes from external incentives, he writes. And for some people, it works from coming from internal reward. And he brings it into a professor, Kei Mizuno, a Japanese professor who directed a study and demonstrated remarkable results. And he found that the key brain center for motivation and reward of those who are academically driven was switched on more for those who are participating simply for those that were motivated not by cash and money rewards, but by internal accomplishment. And there he brings it into Chassidus and shows how Chassidus takes it to a whole new level in the Midas HaNetzach, Midas HaNetzochen, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim, which is the basis of the Maimorim Basel Legani. HaNetzochen is mevazbez ha'etzis, in order to be victorious, how that plays itself out in our lives, that type of motivation. I found this to be a very focused and a very direct approach to a very particular thing, Chassidus, and applying it to a real scenario, as I said, in secular discussions about the idea of achievement motivation. This and the other essays can be found, firstly, if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter at meaningfullife.com, and also posted at meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. That's one. Next one. The next one is written by, the title, Making the Most of Our Differences, by Levi Potash, age 34, Shliach in Redwood, California. Okay. This too, very fascinating essay about conflict, where we see all in our lives conflict in families and homes, teachers and students, spouses and so on, and talking about exploring a solution based on Chabad Chassidus insight into psychology and Judaism, which will give us guidance on how to minimize conflict and how people can cooperate with each other with respect and even love. Citing real sources in Maimorim, different Maimorim, he brings out 4 key concepts. Ein loch adam she'ein lo isha. Every person has his unique contribution and unique qualities. Number 2, there are genuine differences among people, even in the source of their souls. Number 3, respecting and appreciating other people is the key to harmony and brotherly love. And number 4, bittul, the sense of knowing one's own limitations and deficiencies, is a critical virtue. And then goes on to explain from, as I said, from different Maimorim and the steps of conflict resolution by awareness of the phenomenon, seeing seeing things from the other perspective, recognizing that your own perspective can be inadequate, and finally coming to a point of collaboration and realizing how you complement each other. Very well said, and brings a actual case study where he helped a couple understand, especially the woman who was more aggressive, appreciate her husband's qualities and minimize why she's getting so upset at him. So it's a very interesting study, which I'm not going to go over. I think you can all read it yourself. And I found that to be a very illuminating and enlightening essay to read. So thank you for that. Okay, the third and final essay for this week will be the one in Hebrew, You Are the Solution, by Menachem Mendel Cohen, age 21, Aholoteda, Crown Heights. And this is actually a long essay, longer than usual, which may be one of the reasons that the judges probably did not put it up in the top ones, even though it's very well done. It's essentially a journey, use it through the lens of Chassidus, into the soul of the human being, addressing some of the fundamental questions of who are we, how we deal with depression and resignation, the paradoxes of life. My critique of this would be that it's too overarching, too much is being covered. But it's well done. And he goes on a journey using Chassidus, starting, of course, with the story with Rabbi Weintraub, where the Rebbe said that you'll find Rabbi Weintraub in your city, that the solution always lies with you, not outside of you. And using Chassidus to explain how he goes through a journey through the mind, the levels of the mind, going from emotions to mind, going to faith, going to the superconscious, the bridge all the way up into the actual soul of a person, the deepest levels of a soul, and ultimately recognizing that there's a divine force behind it all. So he really goes through the whole structure, I would say the skeleton, you can say, of the human being's structure based on Chassidus, and all coming back, of course, is that it lies at your doorstep, the power to create that change by recognizing the divine in everything. But to get there, you have to go through all these levels, not just emotions which are subjective, but into the mind, and so on and so forth. Again, can all be read on meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. And with this, we will conclude this episode, even though there's so much more to talk about, but there's always next week, 9 p.m. every Sunday. My Life, this has been My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 89. God should bless us all, the week of Vayishlach, Yitzchak, to recognize, number one, our shlichus, and remember always the Meshaleach and the source. And when you connect it above, one does not fall below. On the contrary, we have the strength to overcome and deal with any challenge and transform every liability into an asset. Everyone should have a blessed week. This has been, again, My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 89. Thank you.